into that kind of a position. And that's the narrowness of the paradigm for hiring in general.
Yes, and though remember what Carnegie said, we will sacrifice getting the best people in these positions. It's unfortunate, he said, but in order to get stability, that's the trade-off.
Can we talk a little bit about William Wundt?
Well, Wundt is how it's pronounced, although it's spelled Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt taught at the University of Leipzig, I believe, in one of the Germanies, near Saxony, near Prussia. Wundt was the world's first behavioral psychologist and probably the most influential. What your listeners need to know before I launch into Wundt is, for a long time, the only place you could get the PhD degree was in Prussia or Hanover or Saxony in the northern Germanies. The degree had existed philosophically as a concept for a long time, but it wasn't until Germany decided to use schooling to get its population to knuckle under that the degree actually existed, beginning, I think, in the very early 19th century. Well, a steady stream of Americans, and of course, people from prominent families all over the planet, but from America, went to Prussia, took the PhD degree, and by 1880, every single government bureau was under the direction of somebody with a Prussian PhD. Every single college, with one exception, I think it was Cornell in upstate New York, was under the direction of somebody who possessed a Prussian PhD. One exception was made for people of ordinary means, like John Dewey, the schoolman. If you studied directly under somebody who had a Prussian PhD, and Dewey studied under G. Stanley Hall at Johns Hopkins, then you were allowed to enter the sweepstakes for big jobs. But there were relatively few of those at the beginning. So the whole country was Prussianized. It didn't need tweets or the internet. They didn't even need the pulpit. It happened because the directors of these universities, and university growth in the 19th century was explosive in the United States. So you would, I'll use the word in fact, knowing full well that I shouldn't. You could, in fact, everybody who was ambitious in the upper echelons of the student body with the Prussian way of looking at things. North, south, east, west didn't matter. Stanford was the Prussian department on the West Coast, and it stretched its tentacles into virtually every other school. Though California still has a handful of schools that hold to the earlier liberal arts tradition, which would be closest to the open source that I talk about.
Didn't Wilhelm Wundt also have an issue with adolescence? He said it's a dangerous, irrational state of human growth.
It was G. Stanley Hall.
Was it G. Stanley Hall?
Wundt's first assistant at Leipzig was an American with a beard down to his belly button named G. Stanley Hall, who took over the psych department at Johns Hopkins University, which was one of the two Prussian universities in the country underwritten by wealthy people. University of Chicago was the other one, underwritten by the Rockefeller family. Eventually, many more did. So, Wundt considered the early teen years, the ones we call adolescence, maybe the early and middle teen years, as a state of maximum psychic instability, madness, you might accurately say. Well, Hall saw a chance to become rich and famous in the United States. The word adolescence didn't exist. Well, the word existed, but nobody treated it seriously. It had bounced around through history without having any credibility at all. But G. Stanley Hall in 1902, 3, or 4, or maybe all three of those years, wrote a huge 2-volume set called Adolescence, in which he minutely defined the disabilities of the adolescent and what could be done about that. All the universities picked up on it like a pack of hounds in full cry after, a rabbit, because of the jobs it created, the titles it created, the money it brought in. So adolescence sprang into virtual existence somewhat earlier, but into real existence in the first 2 decades of the 20th century under Wilhelm Wundt's first assistant at the University of Leipzig, G. Stanley Hall. And, of course, it became too profitable ever to give up. Even today, even though, and your listeners need to know this, even though George Washington, who never was considered super bright, he was okay, was studying trigonometry at age 11. Thomas Jefferson was running a plantation with 2,500 employees, all by himself, his parents deceased, at age 13, I think, for Jefferson. Our first admiral in American history was in charge of a warship at the age of 12. He wasn't an admiral. He had been assigned to a captured British ship in the War of 1812 in order to sail it from Peru to Boston. Well, I think one of the reasons that early American history is glossed over universally in schools, when it used to be minutely examined, is in this new world we had plenty of opportunity for adolescents to become powerful, wealthy, useful. They were an essential part of building that new society. And, of course, they're the most inventive people in the world. But with adolescents, they were withdrawn from the general community and have been ever since, to a great, great financial loss to the rest of us. Because we keep them, we artificially extend their childhood. Adolescence isn't over anymore at 21. Nobody's silly enough to believe that.
There's a lot of people in Congress that run the country that are still in their adolescence under that.
You would think
under that context,
their public display is right.
I want to talk about the comment in Weapons of Mass Instruction about the fact that aside from basic arithmetic, that statistics end up being more important than a lot of the subjects that are taken in the math.
Well, that doesn't come from John Gatto.
No.
That comes from Alfred North Whitehead, who was not only a major philosopher, but a major mathematician. His book, along with Bertrand Russell, Principia Mathematica, I think it's published around the First World War, was one of these gigantic, influential documents in all human history. So in his very small volume that I'd really recommend to anybody listening, The Aims of Education, it's been continuously in print for nearly 100 years, he says that besides addition, subtraction, multiplication, that the only math worth knowing, unless you have a specific job that requires it, is statistics, because it enables you roughly to predict the future, as long as you're careful, wary